What event in your life still with you to this day? Story 1. There was a girl next door to my grandparents' house that I had the biggest crush on. Her name was Becca. We had known each other since we were really little. We were both starting to develop feelings for the opposite sex at the same time, and we shared similar troubled childhoods. Becca lived with her grandparents, too. Somewhere between holding hands and having a first kiss, Becca gave me a ring. She borrowed it from her grandpa and needed it back the next day. I was on cloud 9. Excitedly, I showed my mom the ring. She asked my grandparents to borrow their truck and told me to get in and bring the ring along. I had no idea what was happening. We pulled up to a jewelry store at Eureka and Telegraph, and she asked to see the ring. She went inside, no kids were allowed, and came out about 20 minutes later. Then we went to McDonald's, the first time I'd eaten anything other than food pantry meals in at least a year. She said the jewelry store needed to borrow that specific ring for a few weeks to clean it. I asked what I should tell Becca about the missing ring, and she told me to say that I had lost it. I never saw the ring again, and Becca never spoke to me again. Story 2. My father was in hospice, dying from cancer. He had stopped eating and was barely communicative. We knew it was just a matter of days. Mom and I visited him every day for a few hours, so he wouldn't be alone. One morning, we got a call. Fearing the worst, I answered, expecting them to say he had passed. To my surprise, it was my father on the line, and he sounded well. He even said he was hungry and asked for breakfast. He told me he was looking forward to our visit. I was stunned. A flood of emotions hit me. Maybe it was a miracle, and he was going to recover. I quickly got in the car and started driving over. Then I got another call. This time, it was the hospice staff. He had just passed away. The emotional roller coaster from that morning haunts me. I was numb for a long time. At one point, I even wondered if I had imagined the entire phone conversation with my dad. To find some peace of mind, I spoke with the hospice nurse who was with my dad that morning. She explained a concept called terminal lucidity, saying it's not uncommon and is usually a sign that someone will pass soon. It helped a bit, but the memory still haunts me. Story 3. I lost a friend to suicide in autumn 2017. He was the first person I truly loved, and also the first and only person to truly break my heart, which happened years before he passed. His mental health had always been unstable, and in the months before his death, I distanced myself because it was becoming overwhelming for me. It's something I regret now, but I also understand why I needed that space. I never wanted to end our friendship. I always imagined us as old friends someday, joking about how he broke my heart when I was 20. Our friendship never fully recovered to what it once was, but it was slowly getting better. Since his death, I've realized just how much he influenced who I am today. I miss him deeply. I understand and accept his passing, but even now, life feels off balance without him, like something went wrong with the universe. I always believed he would get better. Story 4. My mom was hit and killed by a driver during her morning walk. My dad was standing right next to her and was almost hit himself. It happened in a public park at an unmarked crosswalk. The driver never got out of his truck to help, as my mom lay there. My dad watched the entire incident. They had been married for 45 years. I still can't get the call from my dad out of my head. He called me from the scene to tell me mom was gone. The driver never received even a ticket. He faced no consequences because the district attorney ruled it an accident, even though witnesses at the scene said he failed to yield. My mom was killed within 2 steps of the curb, just one more second, and she would have been safe. The driver struck her on the shoulder, which even the police confirmed. He broke the law, yet faced no consequences. Story 5. When I was 16, I was on my way to take the SAT on a Saturday morning. I pulled up to a 4-way stop on a quiet street, looked both ways, and saw a car in the distance to my right. I figured I was safe since he had to stop at his sign. As I entered the intersection, I glanced to my right again, and the car was already at the intersection, speeding at 55 miles per hour in a 25 miles per hour zone. It was clear he wasn't stopping. Time slowed down as I realized he was about to hit the side of my small pickup truck. I turned away from the window to protect my face from potential flying glass, gripped the wheel tightly, and hoped for the best. The car hit me, flipping my truck onto its side, and I collided with a telephone pole. As I lay there on my side, I felt all over my body, expecting serious injuries. Amazingly, my worst injury was a scraped elbow. This happened nearly 10 years ago, and even now, I drive cautiously at intersections. I always wait a few extra seconds if a car is approaching too quickly. There have been times when a fast-approaching car sends my heart racing, making me fear another accident. I've never fully trusted other drivers since that day, and my defensive driving has served me well. On the bright side, the driver who hit me immediately called the police and shoved his shirt through a crack in my door to cover me while an officer broke the window and pulled me out. He sustained several broken bones, admitted fault to the police, and personally apologized to both my mother and me multiple times. As unfortunate as it was that he hit me, at least he wasn't a bad person. I even managed to take the SAT that day, although my hand was still shaking from the adrenaline. Story 6. My grandfather assaulted me when I was 20. It took me 10 years to tell my family the truth. They sensed something had happened, but I never shared the details. When confronted, he angrily denied it to my parents. My grandmother, with whom I was incredibly close, called me a liar and insisted he would never do such a thing, even though she was there when it happened. She had been napping on the couch just a few feet away. No one truly understands how deeply something like this can affect a person until they've experienced it themselves. I haven't spoken to my grandparents since then, and I think about it every single day. I am no longer invited to family gatherings, and while my parents say they believe me, they still attend these events for my grandmother's sake. It's incredibly painful. Story 7. 3 years ago, my dad had a stroke, which left him with aphasia. Now, about 95% of his speech is affected. He often says apple when he means garbage, or basement when he means garden. And he has only called me by my mom's name since the stroke. However, his comprehension and knowledge are still intact. To him, it feels like he's saying the right words, but to everyone else, it sounds jumbled. Writing is similar. He writes incorrect letters, but it looks fine to him. He's still here, which is amazing, but his inability to communicate effectively has completely changed our lives. He speaks less now and struggles with depression, but finding effective therapy for someone who can't communicate verbally is challenging. We used to have deep conversations, but now, understanding even a single thought of his can take over 30 minutes. The most heartbreaking part is that he knows exactly what he wants to say. He just can't express it. Story 8. When I was a child, I received an invitation to a birthday party. It was handwritten and given to me by the birthday boy himself. But when I arrived at the party, he pretended not to remember inviting me and asked to see the invitation. He then denied writing it in front of many classmates, claiming I had invited myself. I was so upset that I wanted to leave immediately, but my mom had already dropped me off. I explained what happened to the boy's mother, hoping she could take me home. Luckily, she recognized her son's handwriting and was clearly upset with him for being a bully. She gave me some lamingtons and a soda and told me I could play video games by myself until my mom came to pick me up. That day, I realized none of my classmates were really my friends. Story 9. Last year, my little brother, who was 18, was hit by a drunk driver while walking on the sidewalk with friends. He was studying abroad in the US, far from our home in Europe. He died on impact. As soon as we heard the news, we flew to the US, where they managed to keep his heart beating long enough for organ donations. But the memory of seeing his alive yet lifeless body still haunts me every day. I have found some inner peace, but life will never be the same. It taught me not to take anything for granted, as life can change drastically in an instant. Story 10. I didn't want to see my mom's body at the funeral, but when the immediate family was invited in, I noticed my grandfather sitting alone in the hallway. My mom had been his caretaker for over a decade, and it seemed like no one had told him it was time to say goodbye. Her side of the family is loud and not very good with boundaries, so they started entering the room early, leaving my grandfather looking forgotten. It seemed like he was waiting for my mom to take his arm and guide him in. So I stepped up, took his arm, and said, "Come on, Papa, did you want to see her? Let's go." I intended to just lead him into the room and leave, but the family assumed I wanted to be there too. I was crying, not for myself, but for him. People started hugging and crowding around us, and someone took my hand and placed it on my mom's hand. Her skin was so cold and hard, and in that moment of surprise, I opened my eyes and saw her. Now, when I think of my mom, that image of her body, unrecognizable and cold, is always the last one that comes to mind, no matter where I start. I've struggled to not resent my family for this, as they didn't understand. They're simple folks, and I've always felt a bit different. I see her face in my own when I look in the mirror, which is both comforting and haunting. As I've aged, my resemblance to her has grown stronger, making it harder to escape the memory. I was her only daughter, and my brother's 9 years younger. She wasn't married, so the responsibility of planning her funeral fell on me at 29. It was an overwhelming experience. However, I've found peace in my life since her death. I've learned a lot about love, loss, and living. I've discovered a great deal about myself and the person I want to become. I realized that no one will ever love me as much as she did. No matter how many disagreements we had, I always had a safe place to return to until she was gone. Losing that love was humbling, but it was a privilege to have experienced it in the first place. The best parts of her live on in me, including the kindness that led me to make sure my grandfather wasn't left behind that day. I think I'd do it again, even knowing the pain it brought. It's a testament to her love and the person she raised me to be. Story 11. I was raised Mormon, and hands down, the hardest experience was my 2-year Mormon mission. As a kid, you sing songs like, "I hope they call me on a mission." You're told it will be the best 2 years of your life. You hear incredible stories from your father, uncles, grandparents, cousins, and church teachers about the fun they had and the miracles they witnessed. You prepare to go, buying suits, shirts, ties, slacks, and shoes. You see the total cost make your parents' eyes water, especially since they're already struggling to provide for you and your 8 siblings. Spending $2,000 on cheap suits, 10 shirts, and nice shoes is a massive sacrifice, but it's all for God, so you believe it's worth it. You arrive at the Missionary Training Center, MTC, surrounded by thousands like you, all with shared dreams and similar family stories. You're taught to be perfect. You're also taught that if you fail to baptize people in your assigned area, it's your fault for not being perfect. So, you forget yourself and go to work, yielding your personal needs to the instructions of the church and your mission leaders. I was assigned to Central America, where I quickly realized it was much harder than I had been told. It wasn't safe, but my companion taught me how to identify gang members and steer clear of them. I was grateful to be in a religious country where, even if people disagreed with me, they generally didn't bother me because I was a Christian missionary. One day, while teaching a lesson about God, I heard multiple gunshots 3 houses down, followed by a speeding car. The lesson ended abruptly. Everyone needed to know who had just died, but no one dared to go outside right away. We later learned that 2 innocent people were killed in a drive-by because they were sitting on the wrong stoop. I quickly learned to differentiate between gunshots and fireworks. The pressure to be perfect was constant, and I felt like a failure for not seeing the same success as others. It wasn't until years later that I realized it was more of a sales job than a service opportunity. While I had just enough money to feed myself, I often went hungry because the schedule required dinner to be at 9:30 to 10 p.m. And I was walking 15 miles daily. My companions resented me. I wanted to be obedient and work hard while they had boundaries. I was trained to have none. They couldn't stand me. I felt utterly alone. The mission president was neither kind nor supportive. He only called when I emailed him, like when my companion threatened me. I felt trapped. Every time I got a new companion, I hoped for someone kind to work with. But each new assignment brought another problem missionary to babysit. I couldn't call my parents except on Christmas and Mother's Day. I was allowed to send 1 email a week, but I was told to avoid sharing negative stories, so my parents wouldn't worry. I didn't tell them about the time I was almost mugged by a drunk gang member. Thank God for the kids who showed me a quick escape down an alley. I constantly worried about the financial strain on my parents. Paying $400 per month was a lot when there were so many mouths to feed, and I was grateful to the community members who helped fund my mission. Years later, I learned that my mission president had all his expenses covered, including a penthouse, food, flights for his children, and gifts for his family. Bats got into my room through a 4-inch gap between the wall and the metal roof. Tarantulas and scorpions were regular visitors during the rainy season. I completed the 2 years and returned home. After 2 years of beans and rice in Central America, I had a breakdown at the excess of American life while shopping at Costco. I bought a new computer for college but felt immense guilt for taking care of myself. It's been 10 years since I returned, and I've spent countless hours in therapy. I deeply resent the Mormon Church for how it manipulates and takes advantage of young people. Story 12. At age 15, I had a 12-level spinal fusion with 2 metal rods and 14 steel screws attached to my spine. It was the most painful experience of my life, especially since one of the 5 IVs I had was bent, preventing me from receiving morphine during the first 24 hours. At 21, while working at a hospital, a patient weighing around 400 pounds began sliding off a bed. Instinctively, I dove in to catch her upper body. 1 rod and 1 screw broke, along with the fusion, now solid bone tissue. The breaks occurred at 2 different levels, leaving sharp metal ends pressing against my spinal tissues. The workers' comp doctor overlooked the x-rays, and it took 2 years and 3 ER visits before the injuries were properly diagnosed. The resulting surgery left me with permanent damage, and I lost 80% of my job capabilities. That was 14 years ago. I walk with a limp and will never do 95% of the activities I used to enjoy. Since having COVID, even simple tasks like moving boxes or mowing the lawn are difficult, making full-time employment nearly impossible. So, to those in the medical field, lifting anything over 50 pounds isn't worth the risk. You could spend the rest of your life in pain with more medical debt than you can track. Story 13. When I was in kindergarten, my mom thought it was pajama day and sent me to school in pajamas. It wasn't pajama day, it was picture day. In my class photo, everyone is dressed nicely while I'm wearing pajamas. Even now, whenever there's a costume party or casual day at work, I check multiple times to ensure it's the right day. I even bring a change of clothes in case I've misunderstood or the date has somehow changed. Story 14. I was fast asleep when I was suddenly awakened by strange humming noises mixed with giggles. I turned and saw my husband, seemingly in a trance, humming and giggling in bed. I tried to wake him, but he was unresponsive. When I turned on the light, he didn't flinch but began flapping his arms. I had just returned from a 2-week work trip and noticed he was acting strangely, rhyming words when he spoke. But this was different. It looked like he was completely out of it. I called 911 and paramedics arrived. He slowly became more coherent, but his blood pressure was dangerously high. They insisted on taking him to the hospital. He became upset with me for calling 911. We're in Canada, so it's free. He threw his wedding ring in the trash and said hurtful things. That's when a nurse pulled me aside and explained that he was experiencing a severe manic episode related to bipolar disorder. He was involuntarily admitted and spent weeks recovering. It felt like I was grieving the loss of my husband even though he was still alive. Now, after 2 years and finding the right medication, he's stable and back to his old self. He holds a job, and we've had many conversations about what happened. It's a tough disease, but it's treatable. Story 15. When I was 16, I hadn't heard from my dad in a while and couldn't reach him. Suddenly, my uncle arrived and told my mom that my dad had a stroke and was in a coma. Since she was the closest next of kin, they were divorced. She had to talk to my sister and me about making choices. My uncle's stoic demeanor as a Vietnam veteran didn't immediately raise suspicions. Later, my dad's former roommate showed up with slightly different details, made advances toward my mom, and aggressively lectured me about doing right by my dad. The situation was chaotic. When we arrived at the hospital, my dad looked like he had been in a terrible accident, bruised, cut, and swollen. We were shocked to learn he had been there for a week without anyone telling us, even though my uncle and aunts knew. We were told he fell down the stairs after having a stroke, but no one had his phone. At his house, we found blood streaks and footprints that weren't his. The police were uninterested in investigating further. After 3 months in a coma and nearly a year of rehab, my dad regained most of his independence, but has no clear memory of what happened. His former roommate never resurfaced. My uncle never explained the delay in notifying us, and my dad's phone was never found. While my dad was still in a coma, our house was broken into and ransacked. The incidents felt connected, but we lived in a rough neighborhood, so it could have been unrelated. What hurt the most was the secrecy and the urgency to remove him from life support. It has made me distrust my family ever since. Story 16. As a young child, I had a dentist who seemed to take pleasure in making children cry. It was normal back then for parents not to be in the room during dental appointments. I was always treated under local anesthesia, but I remember him repeatedly puncturing my tongue and other areas in my mouth with the needle. When I cried, he would tell me that no one would believe me. I never told anyone. He even once told my parents that I was moving too much, which is why I was bleeding excessively during a visit. My parents didn't complain because he did a good job with my teeth. Now, 30 years later, I still have scars in my mouth that I can feel with my tongue. I don't have to explain why I'm still afraid of the dentist, do I? Story 17. A few traumatic events compounded my childhood experiences. When I was around 12, my father set himself on fire due to extreme pain and depression. He had HIV. He did this because my aunt hadn't brought his medication back quickly enough. I wasn't there when it happened, but the emotional impact hit me hard. HIV treatments were just becoming available, but they were too little too late for him, and we couldn't afford them anyway. During my freshman year of college, my grandfather passed away after prolonged mistreatment at the hospital. which should have been considered malpractice. I was too poor to afford a trip home for his funeral, let alone offer any help. Later that same year, my stepfather took his own life in a tragic manner, and again, I wasn't there when it happened. He had previously attempted to harm himself and once arrived at our house with stitches across his neck. The signs were there, I suppose. 18 years later, I manage a large organization with white-collar colleagues, but I still feel like an outsider in my social and personal relationships. Despite my financial success, my past haunts me, and I struggle to find anyone who truly understands. Story 18. There was a spot by the river where a small bridge created a kind of mini pool, making it a little paradise. One day, we saw fireboats and an ambulance rushing down the river, and they told us to evacuate. It turned out that a 17-year-old boy had jumped from a car bridge about 1 kilometer upstream as part of a dare. While he was struggling in the water, a 14-year-old girl tried to save him, but got stuck herself. Fortunately, a local canoeist was nearby and managed to save the girl, but it was too late for the boy. A helicopter arrived shortly after and pulled the boy's body out. I remember the paramedics' expressions when they realized he was gone. His mother arrived but couldn't understand what was happening since she only spoke Arabic. Her face turned pale when a local translated the devastating words, "He's dead." It was hard to return to that place a week later without thinking of what had happened. Story 19. I experienced the healthiest relationship of my life, only for it to end in heartbreak. I left for a 6-month deployment, during which I had a few port visits, allowing me to call and FaceTime instead of using my ship email. I would stay up until 1 a.m. just to call her because of the time zone difference. Toward the end of the deployment, with just over a month left, I noticed that her emails were becoming less frequent, but I thought nothing of it. The day I returned home, I went to see her, and her body language was completely different. Still, I was too happy to be home to notice anything wrong. She encouraged me to visit my parents for a few days, and when I returned, she kept delaying our date night. Hours passed, and she eventually told me to grab some food on my own because she was still working on her Jeep. Eventually, she showed up at my door with all my belongings that had been at her place. She broke up with me with no explanation. 6 months later, I was still devastated by both the breakup and the difficult deployment. I later found out from friends that she had cheated on me a few weeks before I returned. They hadn't told me because they weren't sure how I would react. Now I have major trust issues, not just with romantic partners, but also with friends. Story 20. When I was 15, my father fell out of bed one morning. I helped him back up and thought nothing of it. He seemed okay. I stayed home from school that day, and when I checked on him a few hours later, he was severely lethargic. His lips had turned a purplish color with a white substance around the edges, and his speech was incoherent. As a teenager, I didn't understand what was happening, but I knew it wasn't good. I desperately tried to contact my mom at work, urging her to come home. It was the longest 30 minutes of my life. When my mom finally arrived, she called 911. The emergency responders took him to the hospital, where he survived only 5 more days. It turned out to be a heart attack, specifically caused by arteriosclerosis. Ever since then, life hasn't been easy. I've dealt with anxiety and grief that continue to affect my relationships and overall quality of life. Even after 15 years, I'm 30 now, it's still hard to move forward. Sometimes I feel like I'm stuck in that 15-year-old mindset, frozen in that moment. I go to therapy, and I try not to dwell on it too much, but the lasting impact feels permanent. Story 21. Being taken away from my birth mom and placed in foster care was a significant part of my childhood. During the first 5 years of my life, I moved around frequently, but I spent a couple of years living with my abusive grandmother and uncle. When I was 6, I lived with my sister, my birth mom, and her boyfriend, who had a history of criminal behavior and drug use. My mom struggled with addiction, and we lived in poor conditions with no running water or food. Eventually, my sister and I were removed from the home after a traumatic event involving my mom's boyfriend and my sister, who was 15 at the time. Unfortunately, my sister blamed me for us being placed in foster care. My first foster home was also traumatic. I was abused by my foster mother and her son, but Child Protective Services, CPS, did not intervene. When I resisted the abuse, I was moved to a new home, where I was separated from my sister. In the second foster home, I experienced further abuse from another child. I spent 4 years in foster care, and the experiences left me with complex PTSD, anxiety, and depression, along with other pre-existing challenges. Story 22. The most traumatic memory that still gives me flashbacks is my father's death from cancer when I was 11 years old. He battled the disease for 6 months, but in the final 2 weeks, he went from looking somewhat gaunt to being painfully thin. I wasn't there during the last 2 weeks before he passed. He had pleural effusion, meaning fluid was building up in his lungs due to metastasis, making it difficult to breathe. They attempted to drain the fluid using tubes, but the cancer continued to progress. One Friday, my sister and I were sent home from school, and my grandparents rushed us to the hospital after a call from my mom. As soon as I saw my dad, I broke down. He looked like a fish washed ashore, barely breathing. From 1 p.m. to 5 p.m., we watched him struggle to breathe until he simply stopped in the middle of one of his breaths. Around half of our extended family gathered shortly afterward, which provided some sense of shared grief. Losing a parent at such a young age changed everything about my life. I know I'm not alone in having this experience, but the memory still creeps up now and then. I don't cry over it anymore, but I do find myself thinking about it occasionally. Story 23. In my late 30s, I experienced an aortic dissection due to a ruptured aneurysm, leading to an 8-hour emergency open-heart surgery. I barely survived, and even my surgeon was surprised that I was coherent the next day. Fortunately, I did not suffer a stroke and my organs remained intact. The chance of surviving such an event is only 2%, so I consider myself extremely lucky. Initially, it felt like heartburn, so I went to get some antacids from the medicine cabinet. As I walked, I suddenly felt that something was very wrong. I ran to my wife's car, shouting that we needed to go to the hospital immediately. Within 5 minutes, the pain became excruciating, as if I was being ripped apart from the inside. I was told that if I had waited for an ambulance, I wouldn't have made it. It is one of the most painful experiences a person can endure, and I can attest to that. It's been a few years, but I recently learned that I need another surgery to replace the rest of my aorta, from just above my heart to my femoral arteries. The operation will leave me with a large scar, and I have a 90% chance of surviving and a 75% chance of a decent recovery. Every day I have at least one moment when I feel like I'm about to die, an imagined flutter in my heartbeat or a brief catch in my breath, and I think, this is it. Story 24. I was always the golden child, excelling in academics, sports, and behavior, always ahead of the learning curve. But then, others my age caught up, and suddenly, whenever I failed a test or missed a soccer shot, my mom would yell at me for hours. One day I was practicing soccer in the backyard and missed the goal. The ball hit a wind chime, tangling it and making it look damaged. My mom came outside furious and yelled, "You've ruined everything out here." I had previously bent some tiki torches in a similar way. I went to school crying, and the concern of my classmates only made me feel worse. Throughout the day, I quietly sobbed, recalling other times my mom had yelled at me. When I returned home, I managed to untangle the wind chime in 3 minutes. It wasn't broken, just tangled. But that incident made me feel like I wasn't allowed to make mistakes, and it's why I haven't tried many new things. This summer, I'm staying with my dad and exploring new interests, like culinary classes, soccer, and even professional gaming. Therapy has helped me understand how my mom's behavior affected me. My constant stomach pains, headaches, and backaches were stress-induced. I've limited contact with her, and it has brought some peace. She seems to be doing better now, but that's likely because we haven't seen each other. Story 25. In my early 20s, I was managing a store with one other employee when an armed robber entered as we were closing up for the night. He tied us up with zip ties and left us on the floor while he raided the safe. We tried to stay calm, believing he would just take the money and leave. But then, he covered our heads execution style with hats, and I felt the gun barrel press against the back of my head. In that moment, I believed it was the end. In those few seconds, countless thoughts raced through my mind. Everything I'd never get to do, like graduating college, starting a family, or getting married. I thought about my mom and how my family would cope with the news. Suddenly, the gun was gone, and I heard the robber continue to empty the safe. We feared he might change his mind and harm us. Thankfully, he left after taking the money, and we managed to free ourselves and call 911. The robber and his accomplice, who was driving the getaway car, were caught 3 days later. Testifying in court was one of the hardest experiences of my life. The defense attorney tried to discredit me, questioning my intelligence and work ethic. I had to endure it, despite the security footage backing my testimony. Since that day, I haven't been the same. When I tried to talk about it, I was often told to get over it because no one died. Once I mentioned that I might have PTSD, and a coworker told me that the term should be reserved for soldiers, not for people like me. I stopped talking about it after that, but I still think about it every day. This happened around 2004 or 2005. Story 26. Last year, my cousin and I were walking the dog in the park when it suddenly started to rain, and storm clouds rolled in quickly, so we decided to leave. We were at the far end of the park, which is about the size of 3 football fields wide and 6 to 7 fields long, with no cover except a forest at one edge. As we started crossing the first stretch, I noticed about a third of my cousin's thick hair standing on end, something that definitely wasn't caused by the wind. She turned to look at me, her face pale with fear. We immediately sprinted toward the nearest cover, which happened to be the forest. We patted our hair down, and thankfully it stayed down. After a few minutes, we decided to continue. Halfway across the park, I glanced at my cousin, and her bangs were standing straight up again. This time, there was no cover, just open, grassy fields. We ran as fast as we could. My cousin, being faster, was a bit ahead with the dog, who thought it was a fun chase game. As I watched, her hair rose more and more, as if we were in a sci-fi movie. I feared it might be the last thing I'd see. Adrenaline kicked in, and we stumbled our way to the exit, which led under a railway bridge. Under the bridge, our hair finally settled, and we sat there for a long time, listening to the thunder and lightning around us until we could breathe normally again. We then jogged home. To this day, I can't be outside in a storm. When it starts raining or dark clouds gather, I constantly check my reflection and hover my hand over my head. Story 27. Yesterday was my birthday, but it's also the anniversary of my son's death. He would have turned 7 in 2 days. I was 38 weeks pregnant when he passed, just 3 days away from being induced. My son and I were victims of abuse. I was shot in the stomach by my then-husband on my birthday after I discovered his infidelity. It was a point-blank shot with a .40 pistol. The bullet went straight through me, hit my son, and lodged in my leg. He passed away instantly. I underwent 6 hours of emergency surgery, received 2 blood transfusions, and was placed in a drug-induced coma in the ICU. When I woke up, I was told that my son hadn't survived, and that I had barely made it myself. The doctors had even advised my family to prepare for my funeral. Between the physical pain and the heartbreak of losing my son, I begged to be sedated again. I was moved to a labor ward, where every time a baby was born, a lullaby played through the speakers, reminding me that while others were welcoming their babies, I was planning my son's funeral. I saw my son for the first and last time in a small box before he was cremated. I never got to hear him cry or watch him grow. I wear a lock of his hair and a necklace every day now. I still can't celebrate my birthday. Knowing that the day I was born is also the day my son was taken from me is unbearable. I honestly don't think there will ever be a time when it stops affecting me. Story 28. I lost my dad last year. He initially complained of severe back pain, which led to an MRI revealing a mass pressing against his spine. Deep down, I knew it was serious, so when my mom called to say it was one of the most aggressive cancers, I wasn't surprised. I broke down the moment we ended the call and immediately took emergency leave to spend time with him. I only got 2 good days with him before he passed. The doctors had given him 6 months, but the cancer spread quickly, and the treatments seemed to make it worse. In my gut, I knew he wouldn't survive. He displayed dementia-like symptoms leading up to the day we called an ambulance, suggesting the cancer had spread to his brain. He held on for 5 days, sedated on a morphine drip. When he passed, I felt a strange relief, grateful that his suffering had ended. The 7-year survival rate for his type of cancer was just 2%, with the disease typically undetected until it's too late. He was ill during the height of the COVID healthcare crisis in a small town. The healthcare system struggled to provide adequate care, leaving us to manage home care ourselves. It was heartbreaking to watch him suffer so much. Despite the deep bond I shared with him, I wasn't consumed by grief after he passed. I know he wouldn't want me to dwell on it, but sometimes I feel guilty for not feeling worse. I miss him dearly and often cry when something reminds me of him. He was an incredible guitarist, and I have all his music, but listening to it is hard now. I wish he hadn't suffered, and I'm relieved he's at peace, even if that makes me feel like a bad person. Story 29. My grandfather's suicide still haunts me. 3 days before my grandmother's birthday, he shot himself in the head early in the morning while she was still asleep. He had always handled the family finances, and things became difficult after he retired. He had promised my grandmother they'd never struggle financially again, so he thought his life insurance would provide for her. Unfortunately, he hadn't set it up correctly, nor his pension, so she had to sell everything to pay off debts after his passing. No one would have expected this from him. He was the best grandfather I could have asked for, and I miss him dearly. The last thing he told me, 11 days before he died, was, "I'm very proud of the man you're becoming." He never got to see me finish college or get married. If you're ever feeling lost, please talk to someone. And if you're reading this and feeling this way, know that you are loved. Story 30. I was falsely accused of assault by a coworker. It turned out she had severe delusions and was eventually committed to a mental health facility. She believed we were in a relationship, which was not true. I hadn't even known she felt that way. When she made a romantic advance, I politely declined and reported it to my supervisor. Her delusions then shifted to paranoia. She later filed a police report claiming I had assaulted her. Her statement was 10 pages long, detailing alleged incidents of stalking, abduction, and assault. I had no idea any of this was happening until I was visited by the police. I was able to provide alibis for the dates and times she mentioned, and the police eventually cleared me of any wrongdoing. However, the process was emotionally draining, especially since her mother, a high-ranking official, was pressuring the police to arrest me. I was placed on administrative leave from work, which severely impacted my reputation. It was incredibly painful to explain the situation to my spouse and family. Even after she was committed, she reportedly continued to have delusions, telling counselors that I was outside her window. As a survivor of assault myself, being accused of such a crime was deeply traumatic. I still struggle with the emotional toll of those days when I was treated like a criminal. Story 31. 2015 was the worst year of my life. In June, my father died suddenly from a pulmonary embolism while I was in a different state, so I never got to say goodbye. The moments between the call from my stepmother saying he had coded and the call confirming his death were the most excruciating of my life. I screamed, cried, and begged the universe not to take him, but it did anyway. On November 5th, my mother called me, screaming so loudly that I couldn't understand her. I finally calmed her down enough for her to tell me that her sister had died in a house fire, likely caused by smoking in bed near an oxygen line. Her husband was also badly burned. I went home for the funeral, and my mother was devastated. She comes from a large family, but she was particularly close to this sister. I was exhausted after the funeral, so I returned home and turned down my phone's ringer to try to sleep. But at 6 a.m., I woke up to multiple missed calls and messages from my mom, asking where I was. My stepfather had suffered a massive heart attack and passed away the morning after my aunt's funeral. I packed up my clothes again and drove back to my mother's house to take care of her. She was completely distraught, and I not only had to handle the funeral arrangements, but also ensure she ate, slept, and took care of herself. I'm an only child, and I live 2 hours away, so I spent months driving back and forth, fearing each time that I'd find her gone, too. I was terrified that if something happened to me, it would be the end for her. That same year, my 18-year-old cat passed away, my relationship fell apart, and I was mostly alone when I wasn't with my grieving mother. It's a wonder I made it through. Story 32. My now ex-wife left me completely out of the blue for someone who seemed to be a complete mismatch. We had kids, a house, and a dog, and we were living a happy life until this person came into hers. Using spirituality, he convinced her that she'd be happier living in an apartment and driving him around because he didn't have a car. It was a massive blow to my self-esteem. A year later, she's more broken than ever and regrets leaving. This person ruined our family just to satisfy his own desires for a short while. My kids had just started school, and the dreams of happy birthdays and holidays vanished because of this person's influence. The worst part is that she's not even happy. She's sad all the time. It breaks my heart to see the love of my life throw everything away without gaining anything from it. Story 33. 3 years ago, my ex stole a large sum of money from my housemate while staying at my place. During the investigation, law enforcement found disturbing material on his phone and laptop. I was 18 at the time. He was in his mid-20s, vulnerable and living alone in New York. I immediately left the state and moved back home. My family was incredibly supportive and got me into therapy. I stayed with him for 2 more years, unable to see the reality of what I was involved in. For 2 years, my therapist listened to me debate distancing myself from my family and friends, who clearly didn't like him, but couldn't say anything. Eventually, she broke professional boundaries to tell me that he was harming my mental progress. I dumped him a week later, and I owe her my life. I always felt objectified, fearing that one day I'd be too old for him. This realization was horrifying. I struggled with guilt at my job working with children, feeling like I was somehow perpetuating the harm. When I finally left him, he harassed me online, spammed my phone, and even followed me to a new city. My family had to intervene at every step, and I regret how much of a mess I was during that time. The relief from everyone when he was finally out of my life was eye-opening. My mental health has improved significantly since then, but the feelings of objectification, anger, and regret linger. It was not love, it was codependency and a lack of self-respect that kept me with him. I know he still reads my posts online, but I want to make it clear, this was not love, it was harm. Stay away from me. Story 34. My longtime best friend and girlfriend started seeing each other behind my back. I was already depressed and dealing with serious issues that both of them knew about. Later, I discovered she had also been involved with other men. I broke up with my girlfriend and cut contact with both of them. In retaliation, she keyed my car and stalked me for months. She once followed me to the gym at 2 a.m., repeatedly hitting me. I never fought back. I only tried to de-escalate the situation and remain civil. I never pressed charges. I just wanted her to leave me alone. On my birthday, my ex-best friend messaged me, bragging about sleeping with her and mocking me for supposedly always running back to her. He also spread lies about me to mutual acquaintances. I continued to see him at the gym, but I avoided eye contact, not out of fear, but out of disgust and pity for someone I once considered a brother. To me, he was as good as dead. Even now, I think about everything that happened. I loved these people and gave them everything, only for them to betray me. It's a deep pain I've learned from, a scar that no longer bleeds, but still reminds me of the hurt. I wouldn't wish this kind of betrayal on anyone. Story 35. In early 2020, I was in Mae Hong Son, Thailand with my wife and 4-month-old son, celebrating our 10-year wedding anniversary. One evening, we came upon a car accident that had just occurred. A sedan had collided with a motorcycle, and the rider was lying in the road convulsing. I ran over to help. The rider was a man in his 40s, wearing a helmet but showing no signs of external bleeding. His legs were bent backward and his body was tense. I tried to talk to him, but he was unresponsive. After a minute, he went limp but continued to take labored breaths. I removed his helmet gently to check his airway, but his breathing soon stopped. I began chest compressions, not knowing what else to do. After a short while, first responders arrived and took over, saying they felt a faint pulse. I wasn't sure they were right. They moved him into an ambulance, but it seemed to be more for protocol than an actual chance at saving him. The next day, I learned that the driver of the car had been drinking and crossed into the wrong lane, hitting the motorcyclist head-on. The man who died had a pregnant wife and 2 young children. This revelation devastated me, knowing that I was with him in his final moments, while his family was left to grieve. I felt compelled to find his family and express my condolences, so I located his relatives in a nearby town. His sisters-in-law were overwhelmed with grief, having just lost both their brother-in-law and their mother in the same day. I wanted his family to know that he wasn't alone when he passed. I messaged his wife and she thanked me for reaching out. I hoped to offer her some comfort, but the weight of the loss remained. The experience of seeing him die wasn't what affected me most. It was knowing the pain his family would endure. I often think about the child who will never meet their father and the widow who has had to carry on raising their children alone. The thought still haunts me. Story 37. Since 2019, my life has felt like a downward spiral. My dad relapsed on crack, went on a binge, stole a bunch of things, and crashed the family car. Meanwhile, I was starving in college with no way to pay for anything, so I had to drop out and return home to take care of my grandmother, whom he had left alone for days. I was never able to return to school. My dad then got involved with a woman who was abusive, leading to multiple confrontations. At one point, he harmed himself severely and needed 52 stitches, followed by time in a psychiatric ward. He later went to jail for a while. Eventually, he entered a halfway house, got sober, and stayed clean for some time. I had to leave my dream school at 18 to deal with all of this. Growing up with an addicted parent, I had just wanted to be happy and free in the city. It was the first time I'd truly felt joy. Returning home changed everything. While my dad eventually repaired his relationships with my grandmother and me. That same year, my mother died unexpectedly at 42, leaving behind her husband and my 2 young sisters, aged 9 and 6. It felt like the final blow in a series of personal tragedies. Because of my dad's past, we were still surrounded by a bad crowd. So my grandmother and I decided to sell our house and move to New York City for a fresh start, hoping to leave behind all the painful memories. My dad followed us to help, and the plan was for me to work and try to return to school. But then the pandemic hit, and financial aid options fell short, so I had to let go of that dream. Story 38. One morning in 2017, I decided to take a last-minute day off from work, texted my boss, and fell back asleep. Around noon, I woke up to a strange sound coming from downstairs. I rushed to our office and found my boyfriend gasping for air, sweating, and turning pale. I asked if I should call an ambulance, and he screamed, "No!" I ran to get a wet paper towel, but when I returned, I realized how serious it was. Within seconds, his condition worsened. His gums started bleeding, and he slumped backward. I'll never forget the moment his face went completely pale and lifeless. The life left his eyes, and he was gone. I was on the phone with 911, who instructed me to perform CPR. He was a big guy, and it was difficult, especially with my hands shaking and tears streaming down my face. Deep down, I knew it was futile, and the paramedics who arrived couldn't revive him either. He was only 27. I've never felt pain like that in my life. I wished I could have traded places with him. I had to call his family in Tennessee to inform them that their son and brother had died right in front of me. I still picture his face daily, even after nearly 5 years. What was once mild anxiety transformed into an obsession with the well-being of everyone in my life, and I'm still struggling to cope. I'm now married to a wonderful man who is incredibly understanding of what happened and patient with my neurotic worries about his whereabouts and health. I know I'll never be the same person I was before that day. Story 39. 2 events still deeply affect me. The first was my ex-wife having an affair after 9 years together and a child. She abandoned our family for weeks at a time, leaving me to deal with the betrayal while taking care of our 6-year-old daughter. She would disappear all night, returning at 3 or 4 a.m., trying to snuggle as if nothing had happened. I will never understand how someone can do that to people they love. It took me a long time to move past the pain. I realized how much it affected me when my current wife started going tanning, and I experienced panic attacks. It hit me then. That's what my ex would say she was doing when the affair began. The second event involves my current wife, an Army veteran with severe PTSD. One day she didn't seem right, and although I asked if she was okay, she insisted she was just tired. Still, something felt off. I went upstairs to check on her and pressed further. She broke down, admitting she was planning to end her life that night. She had prepared all the pills, and if I hadn't checked on her, she might not be here today. I didn't sleep for 3 days after that, and I still get a sick feeling in my stomach when I think about it. We got her the help she needed, and she's doing much better now. But I don't think she realizes how much that night impacted me. Story 40. It was the beginning of my last year of high school. I was on the debate team, and we traveled to a competition in another city. That's where I met A. We immediately clicked and exchanged numbers, and I often visited her city to see her. We went on a few dates, and I fell for her. Being a private and introverted person, I never really told any of my friends or family about her. Similarly, she never introduced me to her friends, so I assumed she hadn't told anyone about us either. We both wanted to take things slowly, so we mainly met outdoors and hadn't met each other's families. The last time I saw her was on her birthday, in late October 2016, and it was one of the best days of my life. Fast forward to December 2016, my birthday. I was expecting a birthday wish from her, but it never came. Feeling a bit hurt, I decided not to reach out. Later, I was scrolling through Facebook when I came across an obituary on her school's page. I froze, unable to process what I was seeing. I immediately called her, but her phone was turned off. I left her several messages and kept calling throughout the day, but there was no response. I didn't know her exact address, so driving to her city wasn't an option. Desperate for answers, I scrolled through the comments on the obituary, hoping it was someone else with the same name. Eventually, I found a post from one of her friends confirming it was her. I was devastated. We had just spoken the night before, and now she was gone. A couple of months later, as I was still trying to process everything, I received a call from her number. I was stunned, but it turned out to be her mother. She wanted to know who I was and whether I'd noticed any signs of distress. That's when she told me that A had taken her own life. For months afterward, I lost track of day and night. I stopped eating and lost a lot of weight. If not for my mom helping me with college applications, I might not have managed to move forward at all. Eventually, I got into a university abroad and left the country to start anew. It hasn't been easy. The experience made me bitter and closed off. I pushed away anyone who tried to get close to me, building walls around myself. To this day, I've struggled to form emotional connections with anyone or anything. The most painful part is that I'm still angry at her, and I don't know if I can ever forgive her. She never reached out for help, never showed any signs of distress. I constantly wonder if I could have done something, even if it was just listening. The fact that she chose to end her life on my birthday feels like a punch to the gut. But what hurts the most is not knowing why. I'm still miserable, still hurting, and I still miss her. Story 41. My parents disowned me when I came out as transgender. It's been almost 18 months since then. I was never very open with them about my gender identity because of their strong religious beliefs. They're conservative Southern Baptists. After coming out, I heard everything from God doesn't make mistakes to you have a mental illness. Family members stopped talking to me, including my own brother. It felt like a character assassination, only this time it was by my own family. I spent most of last year trying to mend things, but nothing worked. Eventually, I felt so broken that I gave up. The people who raised and loved me turned their backs on me at my most vulnerable moment, and it changed me. They didn't just reject me, they rejected anyone who accepted me. Even my sister is no longer comfortable being alone with them. I break down crying at random, experience flashbacks, and have dreams haunted by memories of my parents. I lost interest in my hobbies, and I fell into a deep depression for over a year. I internalized the guilt and blamed myself for it all. It's the worst experience of my life. Sometimes I honestly wish they had died instead, so my memories of them wouldn't be so tainted. Story 42. One night after drinking, my roommate stepped into an alley to vomit while I waited on a nearby bench. I was pretty drunk and almost dozed off. Suddenly, I noticed two guys entering the alley. It was odd since it didn't seem like a place you'd pass through, so I got up to check on my friend. When I caught up, one of the men had my roommate pressed against the wall, while the other stared directly at me. I froze. 1,000 thoughts raced through my head, each more foolish than the last. I contemplated running, shouting, or using the bottle in my hand as a weapon, but I couldn't move or speak. Thankfully, my friend managed to defuse the situation by talking, turning what could have been a robbery into a strange conversation. He's always been quick with words, but I have no idea how he managed to turn it around. Eventually, the two men left, and so did we. Since that night, I haven't been able to drink socially. I get anxious, keeping an eye on everyone around me. I turn into a paranoid chaperone, trying to ensure no one's drink is tampered with. If someone pairs off with a stranger, I keep a close eye on them, fearing something might go wrong. When it's time to leave, my mind goes into panic mode. I worry that someone might be attacked on their way home, yet I know I can't walk everyone home. The constant dread is exhausting, but no one else seems to understand. People have misinterpreted my behavior as controlling, but that's not the case. I know the odds of something happening are low, but it only takes one incident to change someone's life forever. I also know that I'm too paranoid, but I can't shake the fear. For everyone else, that night was just another night, but for me, it changed everything. Story 43. My mom left my dad, who was emotionally manipulative. I only realized the extent of it later. When she first left, he overdosed on pain medication. She took him to the hospital and, feeling guilty, agreed to stay with him. But a week later, she realized she couldn't be responsible for his choices and left again. Once more, he attempted an overdose, and she took him to the hospital. This time, she refused to bring him back home, having him admitted to a mental health unit. Unfortunately, the unit mishandled his care, dismissing her concerns that he was still a danger to himself. The unit released him to the care of his sister, who was also dealing with her own marital issues and wasn't home much. I was feeling guilty for not visiting him that week, as I was just starting a new relationship. I texted him that morning, wanting to stop by for tea after work. He didn't respond to my texts or calls, which raised my concerns. I rushed to his place, speeding through the city. When I arrived, I found him in the attic, having taken his own life. The details still haunt me, especially knowing he had to sit in such a cramped space to do it, meaning he could have stopped at any moment. The lies from his social worker added to the pain. He was already gone by 3 p.m., even though they claimed to have spoken to him at lunchtime. The police had to read through my messages but didn't log which ones were unread, so I'll never know if he saw my text before he made his decision. I talk openly about what happened, often using dark humor as a coping mechanism, but the weight of it all remains. Story 44. For years, my mom battled cancer. It wasn't aggressive, so I didn't think about it much, especially after moving out to focus on my own life. Eventually, she stopped pursuing traditional treatment and turned to holistic options in Tijuana. I remember spending hours pleading with her to continue conventional treatment, warning her about the risks, but she refused. Her decision was heavily influenced by essential oil and anti-vaccine Facebook groups that discouraged listening to doctors. My dad and sister were convinced that her choice was divine intervention. Months later, she told me that the cancer wasn't growing, so I figured the alternative treatment might be working. Then, while I was stationed across the country, I got a call from my superior, telling me I needed to take emergency leave because my mom was very sick. I was confused because I thought everything was going well. When I called my dad, I heard him cry for the first time in my life. He said that my mom had only 6 months to live. I assumed I had more time, so I took only 10 days of leave, planning to return later. But when I got home, I was shocked by her appearance. She was jaundiced, emaciated, and barely recognizable. I realized how dire the situation was. I spent 2 days with her before she passed. Her slow, labored breaths are seared into my memory as I sat by her side, repeatedly telling her, "I love you." I miss her every day, and I often wake up thinking she's still alive, even though it's been nearly 3 years since her death. I constantly beat myself up for not convincing her to pursue traditional treatment. Now she'll never see me get married, watch me achieve my goals, or meet her grandchildren. Please spend time with your loved ones. They can leave your life so quickly. Story 45. I married a woman who became cold and distant the day after our wedding, as if she had suddenly realized she'd made a huge mistake. A few months earlier, she had shown me photos from college trips, including cutesy selfies with her lab partner. When I brought it up, she accused me of being untrusting. After our divorce, she ended up with him. Looking back, I saw the signs, but I blame myself for being paranoid. Despite everything, I tried to make her leaving as easy as possible because I loved her. I helped her move out, even giving her our mattress so she'd have somewhere to sleep. I tried to maintain a friendship, but each time we met up, she had a long list of things she wanted to take from our home. She never complained while we were together, and we never fought. After the divorce, she blocked me and many mutual friends on social media before eventually moving away. Now, I can't even contact her if I wanted to. I still feel like I must have done something wrong, but I have no idea what it was. I wish I could find closure, but it seems impossible. This experience sent me into years of depression and alcoholism, something I'm only now trying to overcome, nearly 15 years later. Story 46. When I was 8, we lived next door to a family with an older son who struggled with mental illness. He was unpredictable. He broke into our house multiple times, stole and wrecked my parents' car, and even tried to assault my sister. Eventually, he was arrested, but his parents bailed him out and took him home. One day, while playing in my backyard, he suddenly appeared in our garage and waved for me to come over. I was a naive kid, so I approached him. He claimed my sister was hurt inside and needed help. I followed him into the garage, but she wasn't there. That's when he looked directly at me and said, "Your family ruined my life." He then pulled out a handgun, pointed it at me, and started crying. Just as I was about to scream, he turned the gun on himself and pulled the trigger. The sound was deafening, and he fell to the ground, convulsing and grabbing at his face. My dad came rushing in, pulling me out of the garage while yelling for my mom to call the police. We sat on the ground outside, listening to the man's painful cries until he fell silent. The police arrived, but by then it was too late. His parents were charged with neglect and quickly moved away. My family never discussed it again, but I've had many therapy sessions to try to cope with what happened.